to the Therapy Corner. Here at the Therapy Corner, what we like to do is discuss all things psychological. Therapy, counseling, research, anything that has to do with psychology, we like to discuss it for your benefit. Today we have a really special guest, Anthony Garcia. Now, Tony, as I call him, is a hell of a guy. He's an associate marriage family therapist. He has a podcast that he's been doing for 4 years called Spread Hope Like Fire. Check it out. It's really good. And he's working on his third book. His second book actually hit the bestseller list. So he's a very accomplished young man. And we're going to be talking today about a really fun thing, not family cycles, parenting, all the things that can go wrong as we grow up. So, and the other thing that I'd like you to know is that Tony's going to be using this for his podcast, and I'll be using it for my show here. And so we're actually interviewing each other here. So this is going to be an interesting show, I hope. So here we go. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Oli. So yeah, I've been a marriage and family therapist for a little over 2 years. I currently work for CHUG. It's a nonprofit organization. It stands for Center for Human Understanding and Growth, if I got that right. And so I'm busy. I'm everywhere. I find mental health to be very my passion now. It wasn't at first, but it is now. So thank you for having me on. And again, like, this is a simulcast. So my audience gets to see Therapy Corner audience gets to see Spread Hope Like Fire. And so it's two hosts colliding, I think. It's going to be great.
All right. Well, let the thing begin.
Let the madness begin.
There you go. Okay. Well, let me just sort of jump in there. It's sort of interesting for me because I've looked at families and parenting for over 44 years now as a therapist. And one of the things that I've noticed is the repetitive cycle. You know, we tend to repeat the same things our parents did. Is that the kind of thing you're looking at and wanting to address?
Yes, I find it very fascinating because I do come from that background. Like my listeners on Spread Hope, they know my backstory and how I grew up. I can share a little bit with the listeners of Therapy Corner. So my upbringing was a little more chaotic than others. In a nutshell, I have abandonment problems from it. My father was he was a crazy fella. So it was like I said on my podcast a couple episodes ago, I was running drugs at 8. I didn't know any better. I didn't know. And so all of that craziness manifested in adult Tony. And adult Tony was not a nice person to be around at many points in time, because I learned that in order to communicate and get what you want, you scream, you yell, you holler, you throw things, and eventually people give you what you want, or they go away. So to a degree, people just started going away. And then I started realizing, well, how do I change things? Why are people going away? And why am I having all these issues all of a sudden? And so it directly relates back to how I function and how I take on the world is literally the skills and tools that my mom and dad gave me. And so it's a process for me to kind of get into and say, looking back on the situation and saying, well, they gave me the tools that they had. They were pretty crappy tools, though. And so what I had to do is I had to refine them, because at some point somebody has to stop and say, these tools aren't working. I can't facilitate the things I need. I can't build the things I need. My life is just chaotic. And so, I mean, I went to therapy about 10 years ago, I think. And that was just life changing to actually stop doing the finger pointing and finally just like getting a mirror and being like, wow, I'm the problem. Who would have thought? So I find it fascinating. I find it very interesting that the family values, the family systems and everything and how they've worked out. On Spread Hope Like Fire, we are actually having actual not sessions. I kind of call them mini sessions with a lot of family oriented people. And we call it the Family Matters segments. And I actually had a guest on my show kind of share his experience and his growth. And it's kind of cool to look now at how when you get to that point of breaking the cycle, here's the cool part of, and the message is you can break the cycle. It's a lot of work. It's hard work, and it's scary to take the first step. But here is the outcome of breaking the cycle. His kids will never know the struggles that he went through. My children will never know the struggles that I went through. I'm not saying that I'm going to be a perfect parent. They will have their traumas. They will have their issues. They're not going to have the severity that I had it. That's just what I'm kind of getting at.
Okay. Well, let me jump in here because there were a few things there that you touched on that I connected with real quickly. One of them was when you said about your parents, in terms of the tools they gave you and the way they behaved, and they just didn't know any better. When I confronted my father with his method of abusive upbringing, because it was, by today's standards, very physically abusive, his comment to me when I confronted him was simply, I didn't know any better. And it was amazing for me because that really touched me deeply, because I realized he didn't. They didn't have parenting classes back when he was a kid. As a matter of fact, even though we have parenting classes now, people don't avail themselves of parenting classes. So he literally did not know any better. And I certainly can't blame him for that now, can I? So the other point that you made, which was very good, I think, too, is the finger pointing that we do. It's like, they screwed me up. And I can't tell you how many times I hear this from people when they sit and they talk about their parents, and they say, well, I don't want to blame my parents. And I said, well, you're right. That doesn't do any good. But they are responsible for giving you their DNA. So there's genetics there. And secondly, there's no getting around the fact that they raised you, just like my father raised me. But, and this is the third point, and you brought that one up too, which was really important. I'm an adult. I don't have to be like that. I can be different. And that's the beauty of it. And I applaud you in the work that you've done, the personal work that you've done. And one of the reasons that I'm so glad we're doing this show is because I want to get the word out there too, that, hey, folks, yeah, don't bother blaming your parents. That's not going to do any good at all. But do see that they have the responsibility for how you came out. But now you as an adult have the opportunity to be different. You can learn to be different. And yes, you're right. So I'm going to go to the fifth point here that you made, which was, it's a lot of friggin' hard work because you have to think about what you're doing. You got to remember, most of us, we're raised by our parents for 18, 20 years, or however long we're at home. I was home till age 19. Okay, so 19 years of seeing my parents and how they interacted, how they acted as parents, how they acted as husband and wife, how they acted as a man and a woman. What, you're not going to soak that up? Hello? Of course you are, So, you've got to stop and go, wait a minute. I understand I have the genetics. I understand I had the role models. But I also need to understand what you said, Tony, which is I can be different. So, I applaud the work that you did because my upbringing wasn't anywhere near as crazy as yours was.
Man, I should write a book about my.
So congratulations on achieving adulthood in one piece.
I know, right? I really like that. I want to go back to how you said you were able to have the opportunity to ask your dad these questions, get answers. Here's the trouble, though, that I see too nowadays with a lot of like clients that I work with, or just friends I hear that have gone through the traumatic experiences. Not many of us get that opportunity to go to that parent and say, why? And ask them that question. Why did you do this to me? And the caveat to that also, when I am working in therapy with clients, is the blame. That's the one rule I have with clients. It doesn't matter. it kind of started with my couples, with the whole, if you're looking for blame in session, this is not where we're going to find it. So we're going to waste our time and we need to move on, because that's what you're going to live with. And that's what you're going to end up with, not that person. And so me, on the other hand, I had to do the work the actual hard way by actually finally realizing, Tony. I refer to Tony. My listeners know when I say Tony, that's my dad. So your listeners, when I refer to my dad, I call him Tony because I have not seen. Well, I've seen him, but that's besides the point. I have not talked to my dad in over 20-something years, and I never got that chance to ask him why. I actually had to sit back, go to school, get all the education, psychological wise, start working in the field, and then I realized he didn't know any better. You pointed it out perfectly. They don't know any better. It is generational cycling at its finest. You think that, the listeners, if you think that you've had it bad, you can go back and you can actually just start marking all the boxes of how many people have gone through the same thing. If you've gone through alcoholism, guarantee you can trace it back about 5 generations. Drug addiction, back 5 generations. You can keep tracing these back, and it's getting worse as it's continuously, as time is going on. I'm actually doing my dissertation on this. If you want to look deeper into the cycle of our systemic issues that we're facing, we can trace everything back in our country, United States, back to World War I. That is where the crack in our foundation as a family started. We had people come back from World War I, which at the time was just called, I believe, shell shock. Or no, it did not have a term yet. Shell shock, I think, came after. It was just they seen some stuff. Well, imagine having severe PTSD, not knowing what's going on, always being in fear. Then you have a family on top of that to take care of, and you're just spiraling out of control. You turn to alcohol or drugs to numb the issue. Guess what? You've just separated yourself from the family, and the family sees you that way because you're kind of going off into a bad direction, and you're kind of taking the family along with you. So then that's where we see also where you brought the point up. We're going to catch some things as we grow up in life. We just are. There's no way around it. It's called role modeling. You can't tell a kid and sit there and scream and yell and hover over him and beat him to get him to get the child to do what you want. It's not going to work. No. Children learn off of role modeling. You have to show them. If you want them to be good people, you have to be a good person, unfortunately. If you want them to be responsible, you do too. It's all role modeling.
Yeah, it was interesting. A few things, again, you touched on. One, by the way, I was lucky in that I was able to confront my father regarding the way he had raised me. But I need to tell you and everyone else, I was in my early 40s before I had the whatevers to
cojones.
Yes, to do that, okay? Because he had instilled such fear in me that I couldn't approach him until I was that age. I had children of my own who were in their teens before I could do that. So, and then most of the folks that I deal with, they either have said something to their parents and they get oh, I was a good parent, what's your problem? Or the parents are already dead and they can't confront them. So I feel, and I've said this to many people, I feel very blessed that I had that opportunity and that I got the strength in order to confront him, and I got the answer I got. So, I'm luckier than most people out there, I believe. Okay, but the problem here is, and you touched on this, is that, most of us, because of the role modeling that takes place, aren't aware of it. And I give this as an example, and thank God my wife's not in the room with me, because what happens is, as she walks by sometimes, I'll give her a little pat on her fanny. My father used to do that to my mother. And I remember the first time I did it to my wife, and I went, oh my God, that was my father. The role modeling is so instilled in us we're not even usually mostly aware of it. Sometimes our spouses are the ones that point it out to us. They say, oh, you're just like your father, or, geez, you're just like your mother. And it's funny because my father, when I was just a kid, he said to me, if you want to find out what your future wife is going to be like, look at her mother. So
that's why I'm with Shirley.
I'm just glad we can sit here and laugh about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's many facets, and you bring up a good point. There's this instilled emotions, trauma in us. That's really I appreciate you sharing that with us, because again, here's something transparent about me. Like you shared, it took you until you were 40 to have the
strength. Let's just say strength.
Muster up the strength to kind of process and get yourself ready to do this, because that fear it's the fear that's attached to that wounded child of yours. Same with me. And listeners at home, look at and try to think about, what is it that you are fearful of? Where is that fear coming from? A lot of the times that fear is just instilled in us as children as to we can't conquer things. We're not good enough. We can't. For God's sakes, I went back to school when I was 26. 26. I went back to Hancock, and it's I wanted to quit. You will have people in your life that will tell you that you're not good enough. And it's either whether your parents told you you were or you weren't, that you believe them or not. I had to take that rough road, and it's hard. What happens too is in the family unit is the cycle is hard to break. Once you break it, you kind of become an outcast to the family for a while. Not all the time, but sometimes you do, because they're stuck in this cycle, and they're just like, well, why is so-and-so acting differently? Why can't I yell at so-and-so? Why can't I treat them the way I used to treat them? Boundaries. We don't know. Most of us don't know what boundaries are. And then when we learn what they are, what I see people doing is they can't, they'll come up with a boundary. That's perfect. That's great. They can't enforce it. And they go right back into the cycle because they don't want to be outcasted. To me, though, it's interesting because I don't care anymore. I am thriving, and I am going on to do things that many people in my family of origin, like if you go back, not many people took on a lot of the things that I've taken on. And I've been told time and time again, you can't do this. You need to quit. I took their advice a couple times, didn't work out well because I ended up back in school. It's perseverance. It's all this, but getting back to the family, it's a hard thing to do is look inward, and that results in one thing that I see most people not wanting to do. I didn't want to do it or admit it, that I'm human. Because admitting that you're human, you have to admit that you are flawed. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to fail. And above all, you're going to experience the human condition of suffering. The one thing that I kind of look at when I look at that and say that is I never wanted to experience that. I didn't want to be human. I fought tooth and nail not wanting to be human because of all of the way in which life worked out for me as a child. I was always in survival mode. Getting out of survival mode was kind of hard for me to look and say, I want better, I want more. And now I'm rambling on. I lost my train of thought. Shoot.
That's okay. Let me step in here, Tony. It's interesting what you were saying, because it was just yesterday. I was sitting with a client, and we were talking about therapists, and she was thinking about possibly going into psychology and becoming a therapist. And I had said something, and she said, well, I always thought that therapists were really sane people, and I was afraid that I wouldn't fit in because I have emotional issues. And I said, join the crowd. We're human. Excuse me. I look in the mirror, I don't see a zombie, I see a human being, okay? And not so pretty anymore, but I am a human being. And I think a lot of people out there have this idea that somehow us therapists are really put together. And it's like, no, we had the same struggles as you did. And what's interesting, and this is what I shared with her, I said, a lot of times the people like you, Tony, and I had my problems too growing up, that allows us to be sensitive to others who are struggling with, how they were raised. I shared with her, I sat with a group of therapists once. It was during our supervision continuing education credits seminar. And there were a few of us that sat around. Our childhoods were so similar, it was scary. And this is the whole thing. That's why we are able to do what we do, because we have a sensitivity to other people. Been there, done that, not everything, but to a large extent, we've been there, we've done that. We're not talking just off the top of our heads or something we read in a book somewhere. We've experienced the pain, we've experienced the struggle. It was like my changing from my father's abusive way to not going the other way, not doing a 180 and becoming Mr. Passive, let the kid do whatever he wants. Wrong. Okay. But learning like you did, as you said earlier, about taking coursework and learning about parenting, learning about family cycles. It's the same thing I did, learning about child development, learning about parenting, and then instilling in my children unconditional love, boundaries, consequences for boundaries, both positive and negative. Consequences isn't always negative. And if I wanted to change a behavior, using behavior modification, positive reinforcement. Whoa, works great. Simple. And my kids grew up to be good kids, good parents. Now I have 9 grandchildren, okay? And I expect them to continue a positive cycle rather than the negative I endured.
Exactly. It's the fruits of our labor, fortunately, we get to experience this. Unfortunately, a lot of the past people that experienced it don't get to see the transformation of the family, which is great. And speaking of therapists, yeah, I get that all the time, where there's this misconception of us that we are somehow like Pope-like we make no mistakes. And I'm like, I'll share with you briefly. I get this a lot. It's not word for word, but I've had this before. Last client that told me they came in for some stuff and we worked it out, terminated them, and they told me just point blank before we said goodbye. They told me, "Hey, Tony," and I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Want to thank you." And I said, "Well, you're welcome. You did all the work. I just kind of gave you some tools." He goes, "No, I want to thank you for sharing." He goes, "I didn't think therapy was going to be this way because of the misconceptions I've had of therapy." He says, "I can tell you've seen some stuff. And I commend you for what you've done, because seeing that stuff has helped me understand, and I'm able to move on now." And he was dealing with some really heavy stuff. And so to me, it's still bizarre when people tell me I'm a good therapist. I'm just like, I don't believe it. I have the hardest heart. I don't like any of my work. I have a best-selling book. I can fix it still, but we're not perfect. If you want to be a therapist, we're not perfect. So if you want to be a therapist, it's a great career. I never work a day in my life.
Amen. Me either. But it is true. And it's funny because, you see, I grew up in an era where when I was in graduate school, the prevailing thought out in the academic area was, don't disclose any personal information. And we, being an existential program, said, no, Sidney Girard's book, Man Disclosing, anyway, but we did the opposite. And it's sort of funny because later on now they realize that in our disclosing things, not for our benefit, but for the client's benefit, they can see, been there, they can make the connection. They know we're human. They know we've done similar things, if not the same thing. So we understand them, not from, like I said before, a book learning or, something off the top of my head. No, been there, done that. Okay. It's like one of the reasons I can work well with people in the military. Yeah, I was in the Army for 3.5 years during Vietnam. Hello, I can relate to you. And the cops out there. I was with the LA County Sheriff's Department for 4 years. Yeah, I know about cops. You're damn straight I do. Okay. But that allows us to connect. So it is our humanness. It is our ability, Tony, you, me, and all the other therapists out there. It is our ability to reach inside ourselves and connect that with our client.
Exactly. Delving a little more into how the family unit now, and what I'm kind of leaning towards on Spread Hope is what we're kind of talking about is what is the effect that we are seeing with the family system completely just breaking down continuously after each generation. It's getting worse. We're seeing higher crime rates. Systemically, things are just getting a little worse. And so on Spread Hope, the message that I'm kind of trying to convey is we're all looking for something to blame. That's what I see happening systemically with everything that's going on. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody wants to be an expert. I see that all the time. I will have a conversation with somebody randomly and I can share with them my expertise. They don't care. I could be a doctor of like a surgeon and they would know better than the surgeon. It's weird, but seriously, if you want to change the world, if you want to make the world a better place, if you don't like racism, if you don't like sexism, if you don't like all of these things that you think that are happening in the world, you can change it. It starts in the home.
Thank you for watching the Therapy Corner. I hope you enjoyed the discussion that Tony and I had. And this is only the first half. This is episode 1. There's a second episode that you can view in a couple of weeks. Okay, so thank you for watching. And again, stay safe and stay healthy.